There is a particular kind of power that people in loud institutions never fully understand until it is too late to respond to it. It is not the power of announcement. It is not the power of title or ceremony or the kind of authority that comes with a formal appointment and a press release. It is the power of being the one person in the room who has never needed any of those things, who has spent 50 years demonstrating through relentless, undramatic action exactly what the institution is supposed to look like, and who now finds herself in the remarkable position of watching the next generation arrive at the same conclusions she reached decades ago. Princess Anne did not expel anyone from Windsor. She did not issue a directive about Christmas guest lists or draw a line around who belongs in the inner royal circle. She did not need to. She already drew that line 40 years ago with her own behavior, and the fact that William is now drawing it in the same place, in the same way, for the same reasons, tells you everything about whose vision of the monarchy has actually prevailed, the story being told about William and Camilla's grandchildren, and the exclusion from Sandringham and the reportedly limited access to Windsor is being framed as William's story, his move, his monarchy taking shape, his vision asserting itself while Charles still technically holds the crown. And that framing is not wrong exactly, but it is incomplete in a way that misses the more interesting thread running underneath it. Because William did not arrive at his philosophy of a slimmed-down, duty-focused, institutionally rigorous monarchy by himself. He observed it, he absorbed it. And the person he has been observing and absorbing more carefully than almost anyone else in that family, the person whose approach to the role has most consistently matched what he says he wants to build, is his aunt. The one who never gave an interview explaining her values, the one who never wrote a book about her position, the one who simply showed up year after year to nearly 500 engagements in 2024 alone at 74 years old, without fanfare and without complaint, and let the numbers speak for themselves. That is the thread worth pulling. Not William's power play, but Anne's long game. And when you actually look at what she built, how she built it, and why the monarchy's most consequential next-generation figure has essentially modeled his entire approach on hers, the story of the Camilla family exclusion looks less like a bilateral decision between a future king and a sitting monarch, and more like the completion of a project that Anne began before William was even born. To understand Anne's position, you have to go back to the beginning, not of William's story, but of hers, because she was already navigating the pressure of this institution when the problems that would eventually produce the Diana years and the Sussex departure and the Andrew catastrophe were just beginning to form. Anne Elizabeth Alice Louise was born in 1950, the second child of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip, and she came into a family whose relationship with public scrutiny was already complicated and was about to become much more so. Her mother became queen when Anne was 1 year old. Her father gave up his naval career to support the new reign. The dynamic she grew up observing of personal desire subordinated entirely to institutional obligation, of feelings managed rather than expressed, of service chosen over comfort every single time, became the lens through which she understood what her own role was supposed to be. She could have pushed against it. The 1970s were not short of royal family members who found creative ways to test the institution's limits. But Anne made a different calculation early, or perhaps it was not a calculation at all, but simply a reflection of who she genuinely was, which is that the job was the job and the job was worth doing properly. She competed in the 1976 Montreal Olympics as an equestrian, the only member of the royal family to participate in the Games, not as a ceremonial presence, but as a genuine athlete who had qualified on merit. She became president of Save the Children. She traveled to some of the most difficult and underreported places on Earth to draw attention to humanitarian crises that the press had little interest in covering because they lacked the glamour that makes royal stories sell. She did it without cameras following her into the difficult places, without a documentary crew, without a book deal waiting on the other side. She just went. She just did the work, and while she was doing all of that, the rest of the family was generating the dramas that would dominate the next 3 decades of public royal life. Charles and Diana's marriage collapsed in spectacular and extensively documented fashion. Andrew and Sarah Ferguson's relationship fell apart in ways that the tabloids treated as extended entertainment. The Queen's Annus Horribilis speech in 1992 was the sound of an institution that had partially lost control of its own narrative. Anne moved through all of it like someone who had decided very early that the best response to institutional chaos was to make herself so obviously indispensable through sheer output that the chaos simply could not attach itself to her. It worked. It has always worked. And the reason it worked is that it is the purest possible expression of what the monarchy is theoretically supposed to be about. Service, not visibility, not brand. Not the kind of personal storytelling that turns a royal into a celebrity and a celebrity into someone who eventually needs a Netflix deal to maintain relevance. Actual service, unglamorous and consistent and renewable because it is not dependent on public goodwill or media approval or any external validation whatsoever. Anne does not appear to need approval. This is not a performance of indifference. It is something rarer, a genuine orientation toward the work itself rather than toward the recognition the work might bring. This is exactly what William says he wants the monarchy to be. And it is exactly what Camilla's position, and by extension, her family's presence in the royal orbit, complicates. The story of Camilla's grandchildren and their apparently reduced access to Windsor is being understood primarily as a William story, but it is also an Anne story because Anne has been navigating the question of what belongs inside the institution and what does not for her entire adult life. She has watched the line blur and sharpen and blur again. She watched it blur during the Andrew years when the Duchess of York became a tabloid fixture and Andrew's associations became a reputational liability that the institution could not manage. She watched it blur during the Diana years when the marriage between her brother and his wife became so publicly contested that the institution's credibility was genuinely at risk. She watched it blur when Harry and Meghan left and then kept talking, when what had been internal family tension became a globally distributed content product. Each time the line blurred, the institution paid a price. And each time Anne watched the price being paid, she did the same thing. She showed up to her engagements. She said nothing that could be quoted or clipped or turned into a narrative. She made herself so clearly a part of the solution that nobody could credibly cast her as part of the problem. Her relationship with Camilla is real and it is not uncomplicated. They have known each other for decades through the equestrian world, a connection that predates Charles and Camilla's relationship becoming public, and that has given them a kind of independent basis for mutual respect that is separate from the family politics surrounding them. Anne attended the 2005 wedding. She has maintained a civil and apparently warm relationship with Camilla in the years since. She is not hostile to her sister-in-law, but civility and warmth toward a person are entirely compatible with clarity about what their family member's relationship to the institution should be. And Anne has always been extremely clear about the distinction between the personal and the institutional. Camilla's grandchildren, the Parker Bowles and Lopes children, are lovely people by all available evidence. Tom Parker Bowles has conducted himself with notable discretion given the extraordinary circumstances of his position. His sister Laura has been similarly careful. The children themselves have largely stayed out of anything that could be described as a public profile, appearing only where their grandmother's presence made their attendance natural, never seeking the kind of attention that would invite scrutiny. They did not ask to be born into this situation. They did not campaign for the access they received. They simply benefited from the warmth of a grandfather who wanted his wife's family close, and now they are finding that the warmth of one king does not automatically transfer to the next. That is the thing about the monarchy that Charles's approach has always somewhat underweighted and that Anne has always understood at a structural level. The institution is bigger than any individual's preferences. What one monarch considers family sentiment, the next monarch may consider institutional complexity. And when you have never been formally designated as part of the institution, when your connection to it runs entirely through one person's personal choices rather than through birth or appointment or constitutional role, your position is always contingent in a way that no amount of Christmas invitations can fully resolve. Anne knows this. She has lived inside this institution for 74 years. She has watched people arrive in its orbit through marriage, through association, through the gravitational pull of royal proximity, and she has watched what happens when the king or queen who created those arrangements is no longer there to maintain them. The arrangements do not automatically survive. They have to be actively chosen by whoever holds authority next. And whoever holds authority next has their own vision of what the institution should look like, their own priorities, their own understanding of who belongs inside the circle and who belongs outside it. William's vision, as it is becoming increasingly clear through the decisions being made right now, while Charles is still technically in charge, is almost identical to Anne's. Not because he copied her consciously, or at least not only because of that, but because when you watch the institution carefully and you are serious about what it should be and what it needs to survive, you tend to arrive at similar conclusions. The monarchy needs to be lean, it needs to be focused. It needs every person who appears under its banner to have a clear and defensible reason for being there. It cannot afford to be a sprawling social club whose membership is determined by personal affection rather than institutional logic. It cannot afford the confusion that comes when the line between royal and non-royal is allowed to blur, because that confusion always eventually becomes a story, and that story is almost never flattering. The Christmas exclusion at Sandringham is the data point that makes this pattern visible in a specific and concrete way. The official explanation that the gathering was being kept small because of Charles's health fell apart when it became clear that Beatrice and Eugenie were present. Those are not working royals. Their father has been effectively exiled from public royal life because of associations that cause catastrophic reputational damage. They are, in official terms, peripheral members of the extended family who chose loyalty to the institution over their disgraced father and who were rewarded for that choice with continued inclusion. Their presence at Sandringham while Camilla's family was absent tells you that the guest list was not organized around the principle of keeping things small. It was organized around a different principle entirely, one about which connections to the crown are being honored and which are being gently, politely, and firmly wound down. That is an institutional decision. It is not a family argument or a personal slight or a moment of pettiness from a future king who happens to have complicated feelings about his stepmother. It is a structural choice about what the next reign will look like, and it is being made now, while the current reign is still ongoing, because the person making it understands that the transition is already underway in everything but title. Charles holds the crown, William holds the future, and the future is being built right now in the decisions about who gets access to who appears on what guest list, who has the kind of proximity to the inner circle that signals belonging and who does not. Anne understands all of this with a depth that probably exceeds William's own understanding, because she has been watching the long game of institutional survival for longer than he has been alive. She knows that the decisions made during transitions, the precedents set before the crown officially changes hands, are some of the most consequential decisions the monarchy ever makes. They establish the template. They communicate to everyone inside and outside the family what the new order values and what it does not. They draw lines that are much harder to move after they have been drawn than before, because once someone has been formally excluded, their re-inclusion requires an active choice rather than simply a continuation of existing practice. William is drawing those lines now. He is drawing them in ways that align so closely with Anne's own approach to the institution that her silence in response to reports about what he is doing reads not as ignorance or indifference, but as something much more meaningful. It reads as recognition, the recognition of someone who spent decades doing the work and being largely overlooked for it, watching others generate drama and controversy and attention, quietly maintaining the standard she believed in, and now watching the person who will lead the institution next arrive at the same standard through his own process of observation and conclusion. Anne has 500 engagements a year to show for her approach. Not 500 headlines, not 500 moments of drama that generate clicks and debate and social media response. 500 acts of service, most of them unreported, most of them witnessed only by the people directly involved, most of them contributing to the institution's credibility in ways that accumulate slowly and resist easy measurement. That is what she built, that is what she is. And that is at the deepest structural level what William is trying to build in his own generation for his own reign, with his own version of the same fundamental understanding about what the monarchy is for. The geography of the Windsor decision is not incidental. Windsor is not just a large house. It is the gravitational center of the monarchy in a way that is different from Buckingham Palace's formal ceremonial role or Balmoral's private retreat function. It is where the family actually lives in the most genuine sense of that word, where the boundaries between the public institution and the private family are most carefully and most consequentially managed. Allowing Camilla's grandchildren what was described as free access to Windsor was an enormously significant concession, not in constitutional terms, but in symbolic ones. It suggested that the line between royal and connected to royal was being deliberately blurred, that the institution was making space for a new category of belonging that had never quite existed before. William's reported move to revoke or substantially limit that access is the institutional equivalent of saying that the experiment in deliberate blurring is over. The line is going back to where lines of that kind belong, which is at the boundary of constitutional designation rather than personal relationship. It is a decision that will cause real human discomfort to real people who did nothing to deserve being made the subjects of an institutional lesson. But it is also a decision that reflects a coherent and defensible vision of what the monarchy needs to be if it is going to survive the next 50 years of public scrutiny and declining deference and increasing demands that the institution justify its cost in terms of clear and measurable public value. Anne would not necessarily have made the same decision in the same moment or in the same way. She is more patient than William, more practiced in the art of letting time resolve what confrontation would only complicate. She would have allowed the arrangements to quietly fade rather than actively limiting them, would have let the exclusions accumulate gradually rather than making any move that could be pointed to as a specific decision. But the outcome she would have arrived at is the same outcome William is arriving at faster. And her silence as he arrives there is the most eloquent possible signal that she approves of the destination, even if she might have chosen a different route. The institution these two people are trying to protect is genuinely fragile in ways that those who love the pageantry and the history tend to underestimate. The sovereign grant exceeded £86 million in recent years. That number is under permanent scrutiny. It gets quoted every time the economy tightens, every time a public service faces cuts, every time someone wants to make an argument about priorities and fairness and the allocation of public resources. The monarchy's best defense against that argument is not charm, it is not heritage, it is not the tourism numbers or the soft power metrics or the argument that the royal family generates more in economic activity than it costs in public funding. Its best defense is clarity. A clear and limited set of people with clear and legitimate reasons for their public roles, doing those roles visibly and well, giving the public no obvious target for resentment by ensuring that nobody is enjoying royal adjacency without contributing something in return. Camilla's grandchildren are not contributing anything in an institutional sense. They are not working royals. They are not in the line of succession. They have no public role, no charitable patronage, no ceremonial function. Their presence in royal spaces generates media attention without generating any of the institutional value that would justify the complexity that attention creates. In a monarchy trying to make the case for its own relevance, that is not a neutral position. It is a liability, even if an entirely innocent one. William sees this. Anne has always seen it, and the convergence of their vision, the younger future king and the older generation's most consistent performer arriving at the same institutional logic from different directions and different distances, is the real story underneath all the specific details about Sandringham guest lists and Windsor access arrangements. The transition that is happening right now is not simply between Charles's reign and William's. It is between two fundamentally different philosophies about what the monarchy is and who it is for. Charles's philosophy is personal. It is warm, inclusive, willing to make room for complexity, invested in the idea that the institution can be a place where people with difficult histories find acceptance and belonging. That philosophy produced some genuinely moving moments and some genuine progress in how the monarchy relates to the world outside its walls. It also produced the kind of ambiguity that William now has to spend political capital cleaning up. William's philosophy is structural. It starts from the institution and works outward rather than starting from the personal and hoping the institution accommodates it. It asks, not what do I want, but what does the monarchy need? And then it makes decisions accordingly, even when those decisions are uncomfortable. Even when they affect people who are personally blameless, even when they have to be made while the father whose choices created the situation still holds the throne. Annie's philosophy is the oldest version of the same thing. She arrived at it before either of them was making these kinds of decisions, arrived at it through the simple process of watching what happened when the institution was treated as secondary to personal preference, and deciding that she was not going to be part of that pattern. She has maintained that position for 50 years without wavering, without public complaint, without the kind of self-justifying media engagement that would have made her principles legible to a public that might otherwise have noticed them sooner. The result is that she is now, at 74, in the strange and quietly powerful position of being the living proof of concept for the model that the future king is trying to implement. Everything William is arguing for, everything he is doing in these early years of his father's reign as he quietly consolidates influence and draws new lines and builds the infrastructure of the monarchy he intends to lead, Anne already did. She already built it in her own life and her own record. She is the demonstration that the model works, that you can serve at the highest level without generating the kind of damage that requires decades of rehabilitation, that duty and dignity and relentless consistency add up to something more durable than celebrity ever could. Her silence about William's moves is not passive, it is participatory. It is the silence of someone who has been making the same argument for 50 years, and now finally watches someone else make it with the authority to make it count. Camilla's family will find their own equilibrium. They are resilient people navigating an impossible situation with more grace than most would manage. The institution will continue its long, slow process of defining and redefining its own boundaries. Charles will complete his reign with the characteristic persistence that has always defined him. William will continue the patient construction of the monarchy he has decided to build, and Anne will keep showing up to the next engagement, and the one after that, and the 500 after those, saying nothing that needs to be said and everything that needs to be shown the way she always has, the way she always will, until the last possible moment, because that is what the job requires, and she has never once in 50 years decided that what the job required was less important than what she personally preferred. That is the power that people in loud institutions never fully understand. It does not announce itself. It does not need to. It simply endures, and in the enduring it wins.